Yeah.
So these elections are extremely important. What's at stake?
Well, I think that this is a very important turning point for Indonesia because President SBY is the first directly elected president ever, and he has served his 2 terms. So for Indonesia now, we want to see whether Indonesia is going to go forward to leave its democratic transition to become a truly new Indonesia with new leaders in the helm, at the helm, and really with fresh ideas, with an emphasis on even stronger civil society. Or we want to return to a situation where many have argued that Indonesia has gone too far in its democratic opening and maybe need to rein in some of the more wide elements of democracy, of this democratic euphoria, and bringing a stronger state again. So for Indonesia, it seems that we are at this turning point where whether we are going further in our democratic opening or whether we are going to do a stock taking and maybe some sort of a rebalancing towards, you might say, a stronger leader. But I'm, as a neutral observer, of course I have my preference. I am firmly of the opinion, I'm a strong believer that what is at stake for Indonesia is that we will continue to deepen and consolidate our democracy regardless of who wins.
Interesting.
So this is not the case of a truly black and white choice, one forward and one backward. Because whether it is the number 1 ticket, Prabowo and Hatta, whether it's number 2 ticket, Jokowi, JK, both are running for elections using the existing democratic mechanisms, and they have to abide by that. And they will be held accountable to the people who vote for them through this democratic process. So regardless of who is going to be Indonesia's leader, it only reaffirms Indonesia's democratic credential.
I remember talking to you during the days of Suharto. Then after the fall of Suharto, you joined government. I mean, how would you look at this spectrum, nearly 17 years, more than 16 years of Indonesian democracy? How would you describe it?
Well, towards the end of Suharto's rule, there's a lot of uncertainty. In fact, before the fall of Suharto, there was always this argument that Indonesia is not ready for democracy.
Yes.
Indonesia, we are so diverse, the people are not well educated enough, the standard of living is still not high enough to support a truly vibrant democracy. Therefore, the argument was that Indonesia would still need some kind of benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah.
But my argument from that time, and I've never changed my point of view, is that it's not the people who are not ready for democracy. It's the political elites who are not ready for democracy because they would have to give up their privileged position, their control of the political system, their control of the economic benefits that having power allow them to have. This collusion between power and business. And it turned out that after a very traumatic but thankfully brief political upheaval, Indonesia has taken to democracy like duck to waters. Everybody, all of these pundits say, the elections of 1999 would be chaotic, would be bloody. It turned out it was peacefully conducted, and we had 48 political parties at the time.
Yes.
Out of 200 that political parties that were established within 6 months of Suharto's fall from power, 48 contested, and in the end, 7 or 10 managed to get votes. But that elections was conducted in a very orderly, democratic manner, and we have never looked back.
I mean, you could even argue even the resignation of Suharto turning over to
and considering the examples that we've seen in many other parts of the world, we have to give credit to President Suharto that constitutionally he stepped down, and constitutionally his vice president took over And although it was a very difficult period, there were endless demonstrations demanding that President Habibie step down. The fact of the matter is that there was no coup d'etat at the time. Yes. The military behaved itself very, very well, refrained from intervening in politics, and supported the civilian president, despite the fact that maybe the military was not really that enthusiastic about a Habibie presidency. The fact of the matter is that everybody who mattered at the time restrained themselves. And the political elites, despite the differences, as can be shown by the proliferation of political parties, they're all committed to Indonesia. So yes, you know, they had very different ideas about what would be the best way forward in terms of the political parties. But everybody agreed that we have to have a unitary Republic of Indonesia, that we will continue to uphold Pancasila as the foundation of our state, as the state ideology. Although other ideologies were now freed to be used by different political parties, bar communism. You know, all other ideologies that were banned under Suharto could be now used freely by various political parties. But everybody agreed that, you know, we will have a pluralistic democracy, an Indonesia that will be based on Pancasila, which is unifying, very inclusive in its characteristic. So the political elites, at the end of the day, all were committed to a better Indonesia. So none was willing to jeopardize Indonesia, which is very fragile at that time, and it could have gone very wrong. Looking what happened in former Yugoslavia, and now looking at what has happened in many countries in the Middle East, it could have gone wrong. You know, some might have behaved in a more egocentric manner, you know, a zero-sum game. But at the end, everyone was committed to Indonesia.
In 1998, we had this discussion. I mean, only one man stepped down, and then I asked you, but what about change? How does this change? And you said that it would be elections to take care of it. Now, Indonesia has had, this is the fifth election since then. I mean, how has it changed?
What it has changed is that it has really changed the nature of Indonesia itself. During Suharto time, there was always to say that under banyan trees, not even grass could grow, because the figure of Suharto was just so dominant and so domineering that nobody could even conceive of challenging President Suharto and of challenging the system. It was like the Rock of Gibraltar, put it that way. But after that, after the fall of Suharto, you could see that the presidency itself is not such a fearsome institution anymore, you know, and being ministers are no longer so wonderful anymore. How people see power itself has changed. You know, of course, the state is still respected, but it is no longer this Olympian institution which is so aloof and untouchable. So the people in that sense, you know, have been freed in the real sense, that they have been freed in seeing themselves as truly the holders of sovereignty. That they are the one who will decide what is in their own best interest. They are the one who will choose their leaders, and they are the one who will hold leaders accountable. And those who are elected to these high positions as president and vice president fully realize that the people are their boss, that they cannot simply talk on behalf of the people while disregarding the people's wishes. And I think that is the most important thing. And what has happened since 1998 is that we have this emboldened society. Civil society in Indonesia, I think, is one of our greatest assets. We have free press, we have a vibrant NGO community, we have so many mass organizations, and I think the two most important pride and joys of Indonesia remains these two largest Islamic organizations, Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, that remains critically important as our conscience, also as being this moderating influence. They remain neutral above politics, The members of Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah can be found spread in different political parties, supporting different candidates, but these two institutions remain neutral, and they continue to hold the respect of the majority of Indonesia, which you know is predominantly Muslim. So this civil society is the one that I think is a major difference between post-98 Indonesia and pre-98 Indonesia. And I think that this is our greatest asset, because this is the one that will keep the government honest, regardless of who will win the presidency.
And how has Islam and democracy in 1998, again, this Indonesia was, the eyes of the Muslim world were on Indonesia. Have Islam and democracy merged since then?
I think we need to emphasize over and over again that the predominant religion of the people in Indonesia are Islam. So therefore, those who demonstrated on the streets, all of the students who climbed to the top of Parliament building, all of these civil society organizations, predominantly they are Muslims. Mm-hmm. Many of them come from Islamic organizations, from Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama. The first president after President Habibie, you know, Muhammad Abdurrahman Wahid, the chairman of Nahdlatul Ulama. The first chairman of the Consultative Assembly, also the chairman of political party PAN at the time, was Amin Rais, was the chairman of Muhammadiyah. Yeah. So Islam in Indonesia has been the harbinger of various national movements, including democratic movements. So we do not see, you know, this dichotomy between Islam and democracy in Indonesia. The Muslim leaders in Indonesia were the ones that have been the strongest supporters of democracy. And they have continued to do so. The fact that there are various political parties associated with Islam, and they have taken active parts in our democratic processes through political parties, through legislative elections, through providing leaderships in the government as a presidential candidate or vice presidential candidates. I think they've always been there, you know, from the very beginning. And President SBY, in his first major foreign policy speech when he was first elected president, he talked about Indonesia's characteristic, you know, Indonesia's identity as being a country where democracy, modernity, and Islam walk hand in hand, and each strengthens the other. You know, each supports the other. So we don't see democracy and modernity and Islam as being contradictory to each other.
What did you learn in the decade, in this 15, 16 years you've been in government, that you didn't know before you joined, while you were an outspoken critic of Suharto, of the Suharto years?
Well, Maria, I'm a political scientist, you know, so I'm an idealistic person. You know, I'm idealist. I always believe that the most important thing is that we work hard and we have integrity. We follow our conscience, not just the ambitions of power, and then it will be okay. But at the same time, as a political scientist, I'm cynical enough to know that at the end of the day, it's all about interests, and everybody who goes into politics mostly goes there not because of they are not simply driven by the desire to serve, but also by desire to exercise power for their own benefits or for their group's benefits. So when we look into when I see how Indonesian politics have been exercised, you know, this real checks and balances between the executive and parliament, I was very happy in the beginning to see that the executive is now really constrained because we have a much stronger legislative body.
Yes.
But then the legislative body is so fragmented and it's so full of conflicting interests that it is not really possible to exercise power effectively to serve the people. Now, so you know, there's also a lot of frustration in government. There are a lot of good ideas out there. Indonesia is not short of good people and good ideas, but we have achieved much less than we could have achieved because there are so many conflicting interests at play that makes it. It is not. That's made it quite difficult sometimes to pursue a good policy, even though everybody knows that it is a good policy.
What do Indonesians want today when they go to vote?
Well, Indonesia is, there's going to be 190 people who are going to vote, and they come from different walks of life, and they have different dreams. Everybody dreams of a better Indonesia, Indonesia that is more prosperous, Indonesia where equity is better, Indonesia that is less corrupt, that is where governments will really truly be filled with people with integrity, who will not steal and not misuse their power. People want to see an Indonesia that is well respected internationally, Indonesia that is going to be economically competitive. Everybody has these dreams, but of course, how to get there. It's a different, they have different strategies. So we will see that everybody wants a better Indonesia. Although there are also groups of people out there, and they have not been shy from voicing their viewpoint, although they are, I think, very marginal, like the Islamic hardline groups, who want to see an Indonesia that will apply more of the Sharia law.
Correct.
And because Indonesia is a democracy, they have been given the freedom to express themselves. And as a Democrat, I respect them. I rather that they say it openly than go underground and carry this out through violent means. But this is a marketplace, and I strongly believe that the majority of Indonesians are committed to ensuring that democracy is the only game in town for us. That we will continue to deepen our democracy, to improve the quality of democracy, to ensure the productivity of our democracy. That democracy is not just every 5 years when people go to vote, and after that the politicians behave as they usually do. We want to ensure that there's greater accountability, that the public service is really the number one objective of our democratic system.
Why does this election matter to the rest of the world?
Indonesia matters to the rest of the world simply because of Indonesia's size, Indonesia's strategic location, and Indonesia's increasingly more weighty role in the regional and international community. Indonesia matters a lot to the region because Indonesia is the biggest member of ASEAN, and ASEAN, I think, is pulling its weight even more, particularly in the Asia Pacific, in which there is such uncertainty, so much tension going on, conflicts between the great powers, so many differences, so many conflicts that are unresolved, and many are looking to ASEAN to play a constructive role in ensuring a peaceful regional order through spreading its good regional code of conduct, for example.
Right.
And within ASEAN, clearly Indonesia is the biggest member and is expected to play a leadership role that would make this idea of an ASEAN-driven regional architecture a reality. Without Indonesia, I think ASEAN will not be taken as seriously. Within the wider community, particularly now within the Islamic world, we have seen so many unfortunate failures of democratic experiments. It is very, very important that Indonesia continues to show, this shining lighthouse that shows that there isn't a different way of state and society relations, of how Islam can be placed within this democratic context in which different faith and different ways of life can be respected. So within the Muslim community, I think Indonesia has to succeed to give hope to other communities that have this aspiration, to open up as well, and to the wider global community. I think Indonesia is also maybe the one that can prove that the stereotype about Islam and violence, it's not the only narrative in the Islamic world, and also, as I say, regardless of what the religion of Indonesians is Indonesia as a country that is a member of the G20. We are hoping that within the next 20 years, Indonesia will become part of the its economy will grow within the top 10 economies of the world. And in the international security system, Indonesia hopes, for example, to become a top 10 troop contributing country to the UN peacekeeping force. So how Indonesia manages its own governance is important to the rest of the world.
Will there be a difference in the way the two candidates will handle foreign policy? Do you see any major shifts?
My feeling is that there's not going to be much of a major shift. There's going to be a shift in style, in rhetorics, but I don't see any need for fundamental shift. For example, within ASEAN, we are already entering an ASEAN community.
2015.
So there's not much that you can change in that. What needs to be done is to ensure that Indonesia is able to benefit from the ASEAN economic community, that is able to strengthen the ASEAN political and security community, and ensuring that the ASEAN social and cultural community is also given sufficient attention. Now, both candidates talk about strengthening Indonesia's economic competitiveness. So, to ensure the success of an ASEAN economic community, each country needs to see that it is going to win. It's not going to be an absolute loser. And if Indonesians feel that they are simply going to lose out from the ASEAN economic community, then there's going to be a backlash against that. And I think that is not in our interest to do that. So both governments, I think, will ensure that they will do the necessary homework. This is more it is more an internal homework to improve the competitiveness of Indonesia's manufacturers, of Indonesian farmers, of Indonesians workers, and so on. So it is not so much as negotiating within ASEAN as improving our capacity internally. And then maybe the rhetorics about 1 million friends, 0 enemies will no longer be as strong because one camp, with their advisors argue Indonesia needs to be much more selective in prioritizing its foreign policy objectives. But even under President SBY, the 1 million friends and 0 enemies doesn't mean that Indonesia simply go there aimlessly. Indonesia does have specific areas of interest. Its interest within ASEAN, within the Asia-Pacific region, with key global players, with key regions. It doesn't invest equal time to each single country. Just a member of the United Nations. There are priorities. So I think it's more in the matter of rhetorics rather than anything else.
The challenges this new president must face, what are immediate? I mean, Indonesia is also at a critical turning point outside of its own internal politics, both the economy, global security. What are the challenges this president must face?
Whoever becomes president is faced with enormous challenges, and that will always be. I think each president in any country at this time in history will be faced with enormous challenges. The challenges of ensuring that you strengthen the economy, ensuring economic growth and economic equity at a time when there's this global competition, the time of conflicts that affects world oil prices, supplies of energy, a challenge of ensuring adequate food supplies at a time when climate change is a major issue. That is not going away. That is, regardless of who becomes president, have to deal with the economic issue, the equity issue. Then Indonesia also needs to become much more astute and adept at its foreign policy at a time when the Asia-Pacific region seems to be a region of increasing tension. Many people have been talking about the lessons from World War I. Many articles have been published about the trigger for World War I, and many have drawn similarities between the situations in Europe in the late 19th century and early 20th century and the situations now in the Asia-Pacific region where there are so many big powers all competing with each other, enormous resources, enormous economic resources, enormous military resources, and no strong structure yet in place to ensure that conflict will not happen. So Indonesia, I think, is in a very important position. It cannot afford to be inward-looking. We cannot afford to say that we have no problems in the South China Sea, therefore we should not really pay too much attention to it or contribute too much to whatever solution that needs to be found. Precisely because Indonesia is not a party to the South China Sea, I think Indonesia is in the best position to play the role of an honest broker to ensure that ASEAN can also play that kind of important role.
In the last few years, I mean, Indonesia has taken an exceedingly large role in ASEAN. Even though it doesn't call that much attention to it, anytime there's conflict, Martin Natalegawa, the foreign minister, would go in and iron things out in Cambodia, in issues in Myanmar. Do you expect to see more of this? Will it be more formalized as the ASEAN economic community becomes
there have been
one market?
I'm concerned by some of the rhetorics that say, Indonesia has outgrown ASEAN, that there should be an Indonesian foreign policy post-ASEAN. I would say that Indonesia has always been too big for ASEAN. So of course, Indonesia will not simply invest all of its time and energy to ASEAN only because ASEAN is not going to be able to deliver to Indonesia all it needs. Indonesia needs to engage with the rest of the world, with the G20, with the Islamic countries, with the non-aligned movement. There still still has some relevance, and so many other areas in which Indonesia continues to be actively engaged. But ASEAN remains of core importance to us. This is our neighborhood, and if you do not have a safe neighborhood, then you cannot be free to go out and play in the wider international community, because Indonesia will always be concerned about whether it's safe, its borders will be safe from hostile intentions from our neighboring countries. So the immediate neighborhood should remain of a primary importance to us, and within that, ASEAN is indispensable. So I would argue that ASEAN should continue to be given sufficient attention. It doesn't mean that exclusive attention should be given to ASEAN, but ASEAN should continue to be of primary importance to Indonesia. It should be given sufficient capacity by Indonesia as well, as Indonesia should continue to nurture it, so that ASEAN will be able to be not simply a regional body that would ensure a good neighbor policy for all of the member states, but also that ASEAN could contribute to the wider regional order, to promote peace and stability and prosperity within the wider Asia-Pacific region. Now, and if the next administration were to pay less than sufficient attention to ASEAN, I will be quite happy to continue to remind them that this is important.
Are you staying in government? Is this
that is up to the next vice president.
Okay.
Yeah, if I'm not here, then I will continue to. I'll return to LIPI, which of course is also a state research institution.
Right.
Yes. But I'm confident that the foreign ministry is one of our best ministries. They have the best and the brightest there, and I'm very happy to see so many able diplomats. The new crops of diplomats that we have are truly to be complimented. I think that the regeneration that the previous foreign minister, particularly under Pak Hassan Wirayuda, he has sponsored young diplomats to pursue further studies. For example, there are more PhDs now within the foreign ministry than probably in many other foreign ministries in the world.
No, it's impressive. In terms of this, I can't shake the ghosts of the past. In many instances, looking at these elections, and I'll bring you back to them now, reminds me again of 1998. There's the ghost of Suharto and Megawati, the very present Megawati, and it seemed to still be there.
I think it will probably still be there. It's unavoidable, given the fact that those who were at the mid-level or just becoming senior management, whether in the military or in the political parties, in 1998 are coming into their prime now.
Yes.
So this is their last shot at competing for power. By 2019, they'll be too old.
Yes.
So I suppose that this is a pivotal period for Indonesia because after this period, there'll be a real change of generation. The debate between Prabowo and Jokowi is that Jokowi is already the new leader. He is already somebody who's not part of the old elites. But a part of the old elites are still around,
yes,
and they are still young enough, or not yet ancient enough not to be able to compete. So the competition now is between the members of the established elites who had been in power in 1998 and have continued, in fact, to enjoy power post 1998, and somebody who is totally new, like Jokowi. I expect that in the future, Indonesia's leadership will look more like the Jokowi of today, because they will come from the regions, they will come from civil society, they won't come from, clearly from the non-military and non-civil service sector.
This is really the election to signal change, regardless, right?
Yeah, this is the election that will see change. But even if, for example, the Prabowo Hatta ticket were to win,
yes,
and their support, and they are considered to be representative of part of the old guards, I'm quite confident that it will not simply be a revival of the new order,
yes,
because of these institutions are already in place.
Yes.
Civil society is already very strong, and the Indonesian parliament, bless their heart, despite precisely they made government very difficult, despite the fact that President SBY is supported by 73%, supposedly on paper.
Yes.
The current government has the support of the majority of political parties in
yes,
parliament, and some 73% of the seats. It's not been a walk in the park for the government to push for the legislations, because parliament is directly elected also by the people, and they are also very conscious of their power. So it's not going to be easy, even with if Prabowo were to win and his ticket has been supported by all of these political parties, there is no guarantee that that is going to be, you're going to have a pushover parliament. So this may be frustrating if you want to push for legislations in order to do something that you think is necessary to be done.
Yep.
But at the same time, it also means that this is a safeguard for democracy, because if the executive were to push for a legislation that will wind back some of our democratic privileges, for example, I think Parliament will not easily support that.
In terms of Prabowo versus Jokowi, Prabowo has more experience with Indonesia's real politic, even in the way he's pulled his coalition together. Jokowi is coming into this, lost his lead, partly because he didn't pull in the political parties. He didn't pick up the Democratic Party. He didn't. Is this something that you worry about? I mean, how will Indonesia's, the real politics of how will this change? Well,
Prabowo was very principled in saying that we will not be willing to make coalition if it is going to be simply transactional.
This is Jokowi.
Yeah, Jokowi.
Yeah.
Not willing to divide the cabinet seats up front.
Yes.
While the Prabowo was probably more willing, to
yes,
make that backroom deals. Well, that is the reality of politics. Even in the end, Jokowi will probably have to give concession
yes,
to his political supporters and pay attention to the various groups' interests and share power in that way. That is a reality of politics, after all. Politics, after all, is about the art of getting power and the art of maintaining power and the art of exercising power. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, and that's why academics usually don't do too well in politics. But Prabowo will also find that managing a team of diverse parties. It's not going to be easy. And as I said, SBY after all won with a large popular vote with a huge mandate. But this current government has not found it easy to manage either the cabinet or the working with parliament. And that is going to be reality of Indonesian politics for the time to come. Unless we change our legislative electoral system, maybe go for a slimmer district-style election that would reduce the number of political parties, maybe just have 3 to 5 parties in parliament, and so that would make it less complicated in having this divisions or groups that nominate a presidential candidate.
So with the frustration with this president, with President Yudhoyono, is also frustration with the system, and this is defining. In many ways, that's how Prabowo rose, gained his momentum against Jokowi. Is that correct?
That is one of the criticism. It says, we need a strong presidency, but he will find that the Indonesian presidency is powerful under the under the constitution, but at the same time there is this reality of a very fragmented parliament. So we have ways to go to improve our electoral system, but that is not for the executive to do that. This is for the nation to agree on that. So it is not, you cannot do it by executive order. But of course, I see that both Prabowo and Jokowi are equally decisive, because Jokowi as a mayor and as a governor is also very, very decisive.
So the last question, and again, I know that you cannot talk about this specifically, but given that Indonesia's narrowed it down to a choice between its Putin and its Obama, as you mentioned, what does that say about Indonesia today?
Well, that shows it shows an Indonesia that is in fact very, very complex. Indonesia does need a decisive leader because we are very fractious, but we also need a leader who can communicate well, a leader who is down to earth and who is one of the people. And we cannot really have someone who is totally trying to be autocratic, because it will not go down well anymore with an Indonesian society that has already enjoyed freedom. And I think that Indonesian civil society is much stronger than Russian civil society, because under Indonesian New Order, some freedom was allowed. And again,
very controlled.
Very controlled, but I survive under the New Order. The academic institutions survive under the New Order, and there are ways of getting around the system. One thing about the Indonesian system is we are not terribly efficient or effective. So even our autocratic system is not that efficient either. While under a communist system, as you know, there was really no room for civil society to develop. And under the New Order, Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah continued to be very, very strong, and they continued to provide that kind of civil society leadership that no government was able to control, and each government leader need to pay sufficient respect to, because these two institutions, do hold the respect of the larger society.
And the last, what role did social media play in the campaigns and the elections?
The social media has played an important role, both negatively and positively. A lot of these negative campaigns have also been spread through social media, but a lot of good messages have also been distributed through social media. After all, the media is only the instrument. The contents, that is, to what use you make of these instruments. And one of the upsetting things about this election is that there are so many out there who are willing to use black campaigns to bring down, an opponent.
Yes, and actually successfully. But anyway, so the last thing now is, if the margin of win is so small, is there possibility of violence?
I would like to say no. And I believe that election is not a life and death issue. If there is violence, I would believe that it's not spontaneous.
Yes.
If there is violence, then it's political machinations.
Yes.
And I hope that both camps are sensible enough not to go in that road, to use cynically, to make use of the people,
Yes.
To create chaos, because the whole of Indonesia is going to lose out. We have seen cases of some violent conflicts in a few direct regional elections, but that has happened in areas where civil society is not very strong. For example, in Highland Papua, where tribal loyalties trump political issues. So when there are different tribal groups competing, even within the same party,
Yes.
and then you can see violence. But usually, the emotional attachment to a leader at the presidential level is not that close. You may vote for Prabowo or you may vote for Jokowi, but you don't really know either of them. You are not going to be personally affected directly. So I think that there's some emotional distance also. So if violence were to take place, I think because someone within the elite circles tries to trigger that violence, I doubt very much that it's going to be that spontaneous.